Jehovah answered Moshe, "Is Jehovah's power limited? You will see whether or not what I have promised will happen to you." In this installment of the Messianic Torah Observer, we will get back to basics and conduct an overview of this week's Torah reading. That is, the reading that falls under the 3-year Torah reading cycle that is found in Numbers chapter 11, verses 1 through 35. The central theme of this reading is being content in the faith. Listen, you don't want to miss this discussion, as it is foundational truth that will enhance your day-to-day walk with and in Mashiach, in Messiah. Shalom and welcome. And greetings, saints of the Most High. I'm Rod Thomas, the Messianic Torah Observer, and I have the distinct privilege and honor to be your host for this discussion. And as always, it is my hope, trust, and prayer that this installment of the Messianic Torah Observer finds you, your families, and fellowships well and blessed. As I mentioned in the introduction, for this post, we're going to get back to our roots and discuss Torah. You know, Torah is our constitution, and it lays out for us the lifestyle that Father requires for any who would be his elect. So today, we're going to discuss Numbers chapter 11, verses 1 through 35, which happens to be the Torah reading for the week of this particular installment, dated 11/14/2020. And today's discussion is entitled Finding Contentment in Our Faith. But before we get into today's discussion, may I ask you to please check out our website, which is www.themessianictorahobserver.org. Again, that's themessianictorahobserver.org. There you'll find everything related to this ministry, including social media platforms we're on, the transcripts for each podcast post, contact information for this ministry, and the means to support this ministry with your financial gifts if you're so led. Which leads me to say thank you to all who have and continue to support this ministry. Your gifts and your support help keep us doing what we do, and we greatly appreciate you for what you do for us. And with that, let's get into our discussion for today, which I've entitled Finding Contentment in Our Faith. Torah reading Numbers 11, chapter 11, verses 1 through 35. Now, the way this is going to work, since it's been a while since I've done a Torah reading study on this program, it's been a few months, well before the last fall feast, this past fall feast. We're going to dissect verses along chapter 11, the entire chapter 11 we're going to look at, and I will read the passage, and I'll be using the King James Version because that's pretty much the universal translation that most people are familiar with. It's not my favorite, but I figure it is it's one of those types of translations. It's one of the translations that is most popular and most researched and referenced within and without our faith. So I'll be reading each verse that we're going to dissect. Then I'll do commentary on that verse and so forth and so forth. So let's get started. Numbers chapter 11, beginning with verse 1. And when the people complained, it displeased Jehovah. And Jehovah heard it, and his anger was kindled, and the fire of Jehovah burnt among them, and consumed them that were in the uttermost parts of the camp. Here in verse 1, the people's complaining. Another word often used is murmuring. complaining about their hardships openly, and the place in which this is taking place has been called Taberah, or the place of burning. Well, the people's complaining or murmuring displeased Yah, which led to his wrath coming down upon the people in the form of fire that consumed those in the extreme parts of the camp. Now, the Septuagint, also known as the LXX, suggests that the complaining was sinful in nature. Why would complaining be considered sinful in the sight of Jehovah? Well, quite simply this. The bitter complaining that can take place within and among smaller disgruntled groups of individuals has the potential of creating and then spreading subversion, spreading uprising, or inciting uprising, creating chaos and confusion throughout the whole organization. And if there's anything our Father hates as much as he hates sin, it's chaos and confusion. Just check out 1 Corinthians chapter 14, verse 33, if you don't believe me. And generally speaking, those that initiate such harmful complaints do so with clear ill intent. In other words, these are often looking to stir up trouble within the organization in the hope of getting their way. Furthermore, when we drill down to the basis of the malcontents' complaints or murmurs, we find that their problem was not with Moshe, as many would conclude from just a simple cursory reading of our focus passage, but their issue was actually with Jehovah. We find in Exodus chapter 16, verse 8, confirmation of this, which reads as follows. And I'll be reading this verse from the complete Jewish Bible rendering. Moshe added, "What I have said will happen when Jehovah gives you meat to eat this evening and your fill of bread tomorrow morning. Jehovah has listened to your complaints and grumblings against him. What are we? Your grumbling is not against us, but against Jehovah." Now, in all fairness, it would appear that some of the malcontents brought their complaints of not having meat to eat directly to Moshe and possibly the Levites, which would be the right thing to do, while the remaining members of the nation grumbled and created contention throughout the fringe areas of the camp. Now let's look at verses 2 and 3. And the people cried unto Moses, and when Moshe prayed unto Jehovah, the fire was quenched. Verse 3. And he called the name of the place Taberah, because the fire of Jehovah burnt among them. So in response to the fiery wrath that was wrought upon the people residing in the fringe areas of the camp, the people cried out to Moshe for help. Moshe, of course, responded to the people's cry for help by praying unto Jehovah for his intervention in this dire situation. And in response to Moshe's prayer, the fire that broke out upon those residing in the fringe areas of the camp ceased. It abated. Why did Father respond so harshly to the murmurings of the people, especially to the murmurings of those residing in the fringe areas of the camp? Well, Abba does not take well to those that express ungratefulness. And certainly we have our share of such individuals within and without our faith community even today. Furthermore, I would add the hearts of those who were behind the murmuring, the complaining, I would guess in particular those in the fringe areas of the camp, their hearts were evil. And the evil that resides in people's hearts often lead to evil speech. Master addressed this very issue when Prushim, also known as Pharisees, coming out of Jerusalem, accused him of casting demons out of people by the power of Beelzebub, who we know is the prince of demons. This is recorded in Matthew chapter 12, verse 24. And the Rude translation reads as follows. And this is Yeshua speaking. You brood of vipers, how can you, being evil, speak good things? For out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. A good man out of the treasure of a good heart brings forth good things. And an evil man out of an evil treasure brings forth evil things. Therefore I say to you, that every careless word that men shall speak, they shall give account in the day of judgment. By your own words you shall be justified, and by your own words you shall be condemned. And certainly, those who murmured in the outer areas of the camp were condemned to a fiery end, were they not? They certainly were. Now, at least one commentator that I highly respect somewhat, he's a commentator, a Hebrew roots, or a Messianic commentator, and I highly respect him. In fact, I've purchased a great deal of his commentaries and writings on various things in our faith. Well, he somewhat sympathizes with the complainers and their lot, suggesting that we ourselves would likely have complained if faced with the same situation and prospect as the ancients were, and that we must put ourselves in their shoes before casting, let's say, critical stones at them and their sad story. But I take a little issue with that stance, that position that this commentator makes. You see, I strongly believe what we have here in this passage is something much greater than just simple whining or complaining over having to eat manna for breakfast, lunch, and dinner for an indeterminable amount of time. Rather, I believe Yah was more concerned and upset with the intensity and the form of complaints put forth by members of the mixed multitude. Abba clearly recognized that the level and type of complaining that was taking place, especially in the outskirts of the camp, were potentially dangerous and possibly bordering on being subversive. This is just me talking now. Father has the propensity to test his people. Look, for example, at the life walk of Abraham and how Jehovah tested him a number of times to see whether Abraham believed Yah or not. And Abraham passed all of Yah's tests, the most powerful test he passed being Abraham offering up his son Yishak, Isaac, to Yah. In that testing, Yah said unto Abraham, and this is contained or actually recorded in Genesis chapter 22, verse 12. Lay not thine hand upon the lad, neither do thou anything unto him. For now I know that thou fearest Yah, seeing thou hast not withheld thy son, thine only son, from me. That was the King James Version rendering. And so it was because of Abraham's steadfast belief in Yah and passing Yah's test that Abba credited his belief, Abraham's trust in Yah, as righteousness. Genesis chapter 15, verse 6. As it relates to our Torah reading here this evening, I highly suspect this was another version, another example, another iteration of testing that Father was putting the nation through. And certainly forcing folks to eat manna for all three of their daily meals for an indeterminable period of time. Well, it's a very trying, challenging thing for anyone to endure. But it would ultimately come down to how each of those who were being tested responded to the test. Would they endure the test and overcome the challenge, or would they push back at the test and even rebel? And I believe that those residing in the outskirts of the camp responded to the testing in a rebellious manner. And Father stemmed the rebellion by consuming those who complained the worst with his consuming fire. Now, I have no proof that this was some form of a test. I'm just saying here, I mentioned earlier, I'm just saying. Nevertheless, how Yah's people respond to situations that Father places them in is very telling of the state of the people's heart. For our Father, our Elohim, our God does not shy away from testing his people's hearts. I refer you to Jeremiah chapter 17, verse 10. And this is Father speaking. I, Yehovah, I search the mind. I try the heart, even to give every man according to his ways, according to the fruit of his doings. And that was the American Standard Version. Nevertheless, I believe if the members of the mixed multitude were in a proper spiritual place, such that their hearts were right towards Yehovah, such that they would have taken to heart the many wonders they'd witnessed in the course of their wilderness journey, knowing that their Elohim, their God, could ultimately be true to his words and his promises and provide for all their needs and concerns. What was it that Shaul wrote to the Messianic assembly in Philippi concerning this very thing? Paul wrote, "Moreover, my God will fill every need of yours according to his glorious wealth in union with the Messiah, Yeshua." And that was Philippians chapter 4, verse 19. Now, I will say, however, that the bigger lesson to draw from this dynamic story is the fact that Yah's people are not to live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of Yehovah. Deuteronomy chapter 8, verse 3, and it's echoed by our Master in his temptation in the wilderness, as recorded in Matthew chapter 4, verse 4, and Luke chapter 4, verse 4. This isn't saying that Yah's elect are to ignore their nutritional needs. Humans require food in order to live. But what Father was trying to get across to his people, and by extension us today, when he mentioned living by his word alone, not by bread alone, but by every word that comes from his mouth, is that Yah has sovereignty over the entire universe, especially over his children. For when one gives their life over to the full control of Yah, well, Yah takes care of their overall well-being and sustenance. Real life emerges not from the food we desire and crave, but from every word that proceeds from Yah's mouth. Thus, focusing our efforts and attentions in this life solely upon Yah's eternal word or will leads to life. The life of the elect is effectively sustained by Yah's word. Do we still need to eat in order to stay alive in this body? Yes, of course we do. However, when we give ourselves over completely to Yah, he in turn provides for all our needs, as Yeshua, our Master, promised. Matthew chapter 6, verse 33. Master stated, "Seek ye first the kingdom of Yah and his righteousness, and all these things, every need, every care of life, will be given to you." And let me just put this out there as it relates to this issue of living by every word that proceeds from the mouth of Yehovah. Yah has the ability to defy all reason and sustain his people physically if he so chooses. Think about Moshe. Think about this. Moshe, who would go up into the mount of Jehovah without any food, without any water that we know of, for 40 days and 40 nights to meet with the Almighty. How was Moshe sustained during those times? Remember, he's out in the wilderness. The mountain of Yah is in the midst of the wilderness. How was Moshe sustained during those times? Only by the word of Yah. So I ask you, why couldn't the Almighty sustain his people today in the same manner as he did Moshe if Yah so willed? He most certainly could, and likely would, of course. We have no idea what Yah has in store for his people in the days and years ahead, do we? Yah's elect in the end times, for instance, may find themselves being entirely sustained physically by the word of Jehovah in accordance with his eternal will. I'm just putting that out. I'm not saying don't eat. You got to eat, but Father will provide. And if for some reason something happens where we don't have access to food and we're in the service of Yah, and Yah so wills it, he will sustain us one way or another. Either he'll provide the food miraculously, or our bodies will just operate without the food. I'm just putting this in context and perspective, that we live by every word that proceeds from the mouth of Yah, not by bread alone. You know, it comes down to being a matter of belief and trust in the Almighty that he will do what he promised he'd do. And obviously, the naysayers in our Torah reading here today, well, they fail to recognize this critical truth. The other important thing I must add to this discussion is that what Moshe did here in his expressing frustrations directly to Yah was not a sin. And we'll see that as we go along in this discussion. Because murmuring in and of itself is not of Yah. Complaining is not of Yah. Murmuring, for all intents and purposes, has no place in the lives of Yah's people. Rav Shaul, Paul, the Apostle Paul, directed the Messianic assemblies in Corinth and Philippi, respectively, concerning murmuring. Corinthians, actually 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 10. And the King James Version reads, "Neither murmur ye, as some of them also murmured, and were destroyed of the destroyer." He echoed similar thing in Philippians chapter 2, verse 14. "Do all things without murmurings and disputing." That's a tall order. That's a very tall order. Murmuring is complaining of one's situation to someone or someone's else for the express purpose of what? Getting what one wants. Murmuring is a direct affront to the Almighty. It's not the way to get Yah to heed and positively respond to one's concerns and needs. You see, the proper way to get Yah to positively respond to one's needs, well, is to go to Yah with the right attitude and heart. The writer of Psalms wrote concerning this the following. And this is Psalms chapter 34, verse 18. It reads, "Jehovah is nigh," that is, Jehovah is near unto them that are of a broken heart, and saveth such as are of a contrite spirit. What Moshe did in response to the situation recorded in our Torah reading here today was to go directly to Yah with the problem. Moshe did not pour out his frustrations and concerns to Aaron, for instance. He went to Yah, and he poured out his heart to him. And despite Moshe's words being somewhat hard-hitting, and we'll see this in succeeding verses here, we'll find that his frustrations, the expression of his frustrations, may have even to many seemed to border on disrespectful. And we see from this outpouring from Moshe that our God is a big Elohim, and he can more than take it when his elect express the frustrations they have with him. Clearly, Moshe was being transparent with the Almighty here, and Yah saw the purity in Moshe's heart towards Yah. It's when Yah's people hide their concerns from Yah and instead murmur and they vent their frustrations. The frustrations they have with Yah to others is when things get a bit dicey. And as I've mentioned numerous times throughout this post, Yah doesn't like acts of murmuring and ungratefulness. And this is the contrast that we see between the way the mixed multitude handled their situation and the way Moshe handled the same situation. You see, Abba took to heart the things Moshe was saying, and he set out to address Moshe's problem immediately. And that's the way our Elohim works. Okay, let's move on now to verses 4 through 6. 4 through 6. And the mixed multitude that was among them fell a-lusting. And the children of Israel also wept again and said, "Who will give us flesh to eat?" Verse 5. We remember the fish, which we did eat in Egypt freely, the cucumbers, and the melons, and the leeks, and the onions, and the garlic. But now our soul is dried away. There is nothing at all beside this manna before our eyes. What we see here is that the mixed multitude was behind much of the complaining, although the children of Israel are recorded to have also wept about their food situation. This mixed multitude consisted of what I like to refer to as hangers-on. These hangers-on latched on to the Hebrews as they departed out of Mitzrayim, also known as Egypt. And this is recorded back in in Exodus chapter 12, verse 38. These once again started looking back at what they now portrayed as a life of leisure. And that's me adding that. But to me, it seems when you listen and you read verse 4 or 5, actually, where they're talking about the leeks and the cucumbers and the garlic, it's almost as if they were living a life of leisure during their time of bitter servitude in Mitzrayim. In comparison, they describe their present situation as them being famished without any hope for the future. And you could get this comparison in Numbers chapter 21, verse 5. But the truth of the matter was that they had grown tired of the manna which Yah provided as food for them. They weren't hungry because Yah provided enough for them. Yah was true to his word, and he provided them more than enough food, albeit in the form of manna, to live. More than enough. Let's move on to verses 7 through 9. And it reads, "And the manna was as coriander seed, and the color thereof as the color of bdellium." Verse 8. "And the people went about and gathered it and ground it in mills, or beat it in a mortar, and baked it in pans and made cakes of it. And the taste of it was as the taste of fresh oil." Verse 9. "And when the dew fell upon the camp in the night, the manna fell upon it." Now, these verses describe the appearance of the manna which Yah used to feed the people. Its appearance was similar to that of the coriander seed. Now, the coriander seed is an Eastern herb used today in traditional recipes. At least that's what I found out on the internet. I don't know anything other than that for coriander. I also found out that coriander has natural medicinal benefits. What those medicinal benefits are, I don't know, but it is a little bit beyond beyond the scope, let's just say, of this discussion. Assuming the manna that Father provided, however, the ancients here, was anything, let's just say, like coriander, we can safely conclude that their nutritional needs were well taken care of. It may not have been the leeks and the cucumbers and the garlics and the onions and all of that stuff that they enjoyed back in Egypt and Mitzrayim, but it was sustainable food. Now, as to how the manna would be consumed or how it came to them, the people upon gathering the manna would routinely grind it and bake it into cakes. It was said that to have the sweet taste of oil. I don't know what oil that is sweet tastes like, to be honest with you, but they said it tastes like it's like sweet as oil. It was also described as being round in shape, this manna. And it fell with the early morning dew each day. It would be gathered each morning before the sun melted it away. And Yah's manna was quite tasty, and it must have contained sufficient nutrients to sustain a person throughout their day-to-day activities. What you'll find as you research manna in Scripture is that scholars, the high ones, the know-it-alls, both within and outside our faith, well, they've gone out of their way. They've gone to great lengths to undermine, in many cases, not in all cases, but in many cases, they've gone out of their way to undermine the astoundingly miraculous nature of manna as recorded in Torah. In fact, they've attempted to tell the world that Yah's manna was actually derived from the tarfa tree, which happens to be a type of tamarisk tree, and that manna exudes, or it leaches out from the trunks of this tree, and it forms small round white grains. This according to Fawcett's Bible Dictionary. They've even gone so far as to suggest time frames in which manna would appear, and the amounts of manna that one could expect from a crop of manna, and the locations where such manna would be found. All the while, they're ignoring the miraculous nature of this food as recorded in the books of Numbers and in the book of Exodus. But we have here an advocate for the miraculous in the form of Gesenius. Gesenius. Who was Gesenius? He was a 19th century Christian Hebraist, a Lutheran theologian, a biblical scholar, as well as a critic. And he gave great credence in his commentary on this section to the miraculous regarding the manna. He states he gives 5 things, 5 support points to the miraculous nature of Yah's manna. Number 1, it was not found under any tamarisk, but on the surface of the desert. We know that to be true according to Scripture. Number 2, the quantity of manna needed to sustain the multitude cannot be overlooked. And when we're talking about the multitude, we're talking upwards of 2 or so million souls by some estimates. Number 3, the manna ceased each Shabbat for 40 straight years. 40 straight years. Ending permanently when Israel conquered Canaan. Number 4, Yah's manna could be ground and baked into cakes. Well, the tamarisk droppings were condiment in nature and could not be ground and baked as Yah's manna could. So it's not a match. It may be similar, and it's always fun to kind of surmise in one's mind, maybe it's from the tamarisk tree, but obviously it wasn't. And lastly, number 5, it's this manna from Yah sustained Israel throughout their wanderings in wherever place their feet touched. So the manna that came to Israel in this passage and in the passage alluded to in Exodus, it was a miraculous thing. It wasn't a natural thing. Folks love to take the glory away from Yah because they think they know it all. And we'll leave it at that. Let's move on to verses 10 through 15. And it reads, Then Moshe heard the people weep throughout their families, every man in the door of his tent. And the anger of Jehovah was kindled greatly. Moshe also was displeased. Verse 11. And Moshe said unto Jehovah, Wherefore, now this is when Moshe goes before Father to lay forth his frustrations with him and the frustrations with the situation at hand. This is Moshe speaking. Wherefore hast thou afflicted thy servant? And wherefore have I not found favor in thy sight? Father, I thought we were tight. I thought we were buds. What's happening here? Why are you doing this to me? Continuing. Wherefore have I not found favor in your sight, that thou layest the burden of all this people upon me? Verse 12. Have I conceived all these people? In other words, have I given birth to these people? Am I their parent? Have I begotten them, that thou shouldest say unto me, Carry them in thy bosom, as a nursing father beareth the sucking child unto the land which thou swearest unto their fathers? He's laying it on pretty thick. Continuing, verse 13. Whence should I have flesh to give unto all this people? Where am I going to get all this meat for these people that they're craving? For they weep unto me, saying, give us flesh, that we may eat. Verse 14. I am not able to bear all this people alone. I can't do it alone because it is too heavy for me. And verse 15. And if thou deal thus with me, why don't you just go ahead and kill me, Father? I pray thee out of hand, if I have found favor in thy sight, and let me not see my wretchedness. Well, in these verses, Moshe hears the weeping of the families, apparently of those who were killed as a result of Yah's fiery wrath. Okay? And this weeping, it angers the Almighty as well as it angers Moshe. And in his ire, Moshe turns to Yah and calls Yah to task for the immense burden the Almighty placed upon Moshe in leading this people. This is not the only time Moshe finds himself at wit's end regarding the people, as you should know, because we've seen a similar type situation from Moshe towards Yah, as recorded in Exodus chapter 5, verse 22, and Deuteronomy chapter 1, verse 12. But in desperation, Moshe takes Yah to task, questioning and castigating Yah's unreasonableness in placing such oversight of the people on him as if he, Moshe, was their parent or something of that nature. And obviously Moshe's frustration is a reflection of his fearful concerns over what was to happen to him and to the people he was leading. So he questions where he is going to find meat to feed the hundreds, if not the hundreds of thousands, let's say, of people in that desolate desert, all the while overlooking, whether intentionally or not, that Yah had previously provided, miraculously so, for the nation from their time in Mitzrayim, their time in Egypt, till that present time. He's overlooking that. Moshe felt tremendous pressure from the people, and that pressure trumped the belief, the faith Moshe should have had that Jehovah would provide for the needs and even the demands of the people. Yes, it's quite easy for me to sit here and criticize Moshe's deportment, his behavior before Yah, when I've personally never been in such a dire situation as this. However, looking back in my past as a manager and administrator, I have gone through periods of time of terrible pressure and frustration and fear that I would not be able to deliver the things my employees needed or that they demanded for various reasons, whether budget or just was unreasonable to deliver, but they're unhappy and they're murmuring. Unlike Moshe, however, during those tense days, I rarely thought to turn those pressing situations over to Yah and let him take care of it. Well, I've since come to terms with my lack of trust in Yah during those years of oversight and I've repented of my lack of trust in Yah to take care of my situation. Moshe did what he was supposed to do. So although I'm criticizing Moshe, I'm also applauding Moshe because he did what he was supposed to do. Yes, Moshe was not elegant, nor was he polished or perfect in terms of how he communicated his concerns to Yah, but he knew which side his spiritual bread, no pun intended, was buttered. He knew that he personally had no ability nor resource to provide the meat that the nation was demanding. The only thing one can say against Moshe in this case is that he did not recognize from the start that it wasn't his place to provide for the needs of the people. It wasn't his place or his responsibility to provide meat for the nation, because it was entirely Jehovah's responsibility. And I'm not sure that Moshe realized this truth fully. But in Moshe's unloading of Yah here, he reveals to Yah a central truth that says it all. And it's found in verse 14. And it's best recorded simply in the Complete Jewish Bible, Stern's Complete Jewish Bible. And it reads, "I can't carry this entire people by myself alone. It's too much for me." Boy, oh boy, no truer words have ever been spoken, huh? Moshe realized, although I'm not fully convinced that he fully recognized, that Father never ever put the burden of providing for the mixed multitude's material and food needs upon Moshe's shoulders. That was Abba's concern. Not to mention that Moshe was a mere man and he possessed no ability to provide for the people at a level that they desired. And that's what each of us must come to terms with whenever faced with difficult and seemingly impossible situations in our lives. Take it to Jehovah and let him take care of our problems. Folks, we don't possess the wherewithal to change most circumstances that occur in our lives. Oh, many of us believe that we have the smarts, and some of us actually believe that we even have the material resources to effect the changes we believe are necessary to fix many of our life's problems. But after we fall flat on our faces enough times and we see we really can't fix many of the problems that crop up in our lives on our own, well, we're forced to turn to Yah and place the burden upon him. Sadly, many of us, even when faced with this sobering reality, like myself, we still refuse to take our burdens to Yah and leave them before his throne of grace. Why do we do that? We know better, but why? For many of us, it's a matter of belief. Belief. We most certainly believe in Yah. We believe we know he exists. There's no doubt in our mind that. We know who he is. We know what he's capable of. But we don't believe Yah. We don't believe Yah will deliver on our situation. And truth be told, we simply can't stand the thought that maybe Yah will fix our situation in a way that doesn't quite match the way we want the problem fixed. We're afraid to allow Yah to take complete control of our situation, just as many of us are afraid to allow Yah to completely take over and rule our lives. It just might not work the way we want it to work. If he could just do it the way I want, then I would trust him. I would believe him. But that's usually the problem. You know, it was during a meal that our master shared with some friends of his that he commented on this very issue of trusting Yah to take care of our life's needs. It's recorded in Luke chapter 12, verses 22 through 31. And the Root translation reads as follows. I say to you, take no thought for your life, what you shall eat, neither for the body, what you shall put on. The life is more than food, and the body is more than clothing. Consider the ravens, for they neither sow nor reap, neither do they have storehouse nor barn, and Jehovah feeds them. How much more are you better than the birds? Which of you with anxious thought can add to his stature, his height, 1 cubit? If you are not able to do that thing which is least, why be anxious for the rest? Consider the lilies, how they grow. They do not toil. They do not spin fabric. And yet I say to you that Solomon in all his glory was not arrayed like one of these. Then if Jehovah clothed the grass, which is in the field today, and is cast into the oven tomorrow, how much more will he clothe you, O you of little faith? Seek not what you shall eat, or what you shall drink, neither be of a doubtful mind. All these things the worldly Gentiles pursue. But your Father knows that you need these things. But rather pursue the kingdom of Jehovah, and all things shall be added to you. Continuing on with this story in Numbers chapter 11. And we're still at we were just finishing up verses 10 through 15. Moshe pours it on pretty heavy in verse 15, and Stern's Complete Jewish Bible gives what I believe is a very heartfelt interpretation of what Moshe was going through as he aired his grievances to Jehovah. Moshe tells Father, if you are going to treat me this way, then just kill me outright. Please, if you have any mercy toward me, and don't let me go on being this miserable. This verse provides an excellent synopsis of the level of frustration Moshe had over the demands of the people. Wouldn't you agree? We see this level of internal struggle and agony in other patriarchs of the faith. Job, for instance, chapter 7, verse 15. So that my soul chooseth strangling and death rather than life. Boy, oh boy. Jonah, chapter 4, verse 3. Therefore now, O Jehovah, take, I beseech thee, my life from me, for it is better for me to die than to live. Indeed, true service to Yah is not easy. Sometimes I feel as though most of us who are of faith, who reside in the United States, for instance, are uber spoiled. Most of us go throughout our day-to-day walk with Mashiach, and the worst thing we have to sort out is what we're going to tweet or Facebook out that day, what we are going to eat for breakfast or dinner, what teaching we're going to watch on YouTube, and so forth and so forth. We aren't in the trenches enough to find ourselves in difficult positions, such as we see here in the story of Moshe and Jonah and even Job. Yes, there are believers throughout the world that are enduring unimaginable challenges and situations that are directly connected to their respective faith professions and walks. Many of them are facing death in the process. But at some point, if Master tarries, most of us will have our Moshe moments. We're going to have our Moses moment. Oh my God, Moses moment. And this was a poignant point I'm trying to make, and I get tongue-tied. Moshe moment. In some form or fashion, we're all going to have that. And the question that we must ask ourselves in preparation for such a time is, how will we handle it? How will our Moshe moment be acted upon by us? Are there things in the here and now, though, that we can do to prepare for those difficult times ahead, those Moshe moments? For folks, difficult times are just around the corner for most of us. The host of evil, they're amassing and they're preparing to persecute. They're going to persecute Yah's people for various and sundry reasons. And we're going to have to be ready for such times. So Abba, in his unfathomable grace, has given us these Torah examples to help prepare us for the challenges that are certain to emerge in our lives. Let's move on to verses 16 and 17. And Jehovah said to Moshe, "Gather unto me 70 men of the elders of Israel, whom thou knowest to be the elders of the people, and officers over them, and bring them unto the tabernacle of the congregation, that they may stand there with thee." Verse 17. "And I will come down and talk with thee there. And I will take of the Spirit which is upon thee, and will put it upon them. And they shall bear the burden of the people with thee, that thou bear it not thyself alone." So Abba in here instructs Moshe to assemble the nation's 70 elders in front of the tabernacle. And these elders are no doubt the same ones that met with Moshe on the Mount, Jehovah's Mount, just after the confirmation and the ratification of the covenant back in Exodus chapter 24. Remember that? And Father tells Moshe that the Ruach HaKodesh, the Holy Spirit that rested upon him being Moshe, well, Abba would place it upon those assembled 70 leaders. And those assembled leaders would afterwards be tasked with taking some of the oversight burden off the tired shoulders of Moses. And what we see in these two verses is Yah in action, responding decisively to Moshe's concerns. Let's not stop here. Let's go on to verses 18 through 20. And it reads, "And say unto the people, Sanctify yourselves against tomorrow, and ye shall eat flesh, for ye have wept in the ears of Jehovah, saying, Who shall give us flesh to eat? For it was well with us in Egypt. Therefore Jehovah will give you flesh, and you shall eat." Verse 19. "Ye shall not eat one day, nor 2 days, nor 5 days, neither 10 days, nor 20 days. Verse 20. "But even a whole month, until it comes out of your nostrils, and it be loathsome unto you, because that ye have despised Jehovah, which is among you, and have wept before him, saying, Why came we forth out of Egypt? So Abba addresses the concerns of the people that they'd been denied meat and had only been given manna to eat. So Father tells Moshe to announce to the nation that Abba heard their murmurings and that he would give them the meat they so desired. The people, in anticipation of receiving this meat, were instructed to consecrate, or rather sanctify themselves to receive this promised gift of Yehovah. When we are set to receive Abba's promises, do we set ourselves apart? Do we sanctify ourselves? Do we dedicate ourselves to Father in anticipation of receiving his promises and his gifts? Doing so shows forth our gratefulness and appreciation in advance for his provisions. It's a principle and it's a practice that we are wise to imitate in our lives as Jehovah's elect. Father then heard the people's whinings, and he affirmed that he would give them what they desired. In fact, Father was giving them the meat they craved for a month's time, and to such an extent that they would ultimately loathe it because it was going to be so much of it. Let's move on to verses 21 and 22, and it reads, "And Moshe said, the people among whom I am are 600,000 footmen. And thou hast said, I will give them flesh, that they may eat a whole month." Verse 22, "Shall the flocks and the herds be slain for them to suffice them? Or shall all the fish of the sea be gathered together for them to suffice them?" So Moshe still does not understand just how much Abba had his back. Moshe then questions how such an immense multitude would be fed meat for an entire month in the middle of the desert. That's a valid question if you're only looking at it from Moshe's level. But somehow we got to move our point of view heavenly. And this is a sobering reality to grasp here. Despite all that Yah had miraculously done for the nation, Moshe still doubted Yah. And maybe he didn't doubt Yah so much as he simply hadn't made the connection. He hadn't made the connection that Yah was the nation's ultimate provider and sustainer. His perspective was still at his level. He hadn't moved that perspective up a notch. Well, actually up a lot of notches. But Moshe goes on to question Yah here about how he was supposed to provide meat for the multitude for a month. Were they supposed to slaughter the domestic animals they brought with them out of Mitzrayim, out of Egypt? You do know that the people were not permitted to eat their domesticated animals. These were to be used solely for sacrifices, which then meant Yah would have to provide all of the nutritional needs of the nation. But somehow Moshe did not recognize that providing the food for the nation was not Moshe's job nor problem, but it was Jehovah's. And this is the lesson that we must learn from this reading. There are some things that we are responsible for, such as seeking first the kingdom of Yah and his righteousness. And then there are things that Yah has declared and promised that he would take care of according to his riches in glory. Matthew chapter 6, verses 33 through 34. And we saw a similar thing on a much smaller scale, mind you, in the story and the miracle of the fish and barley loaves that are recorded in Matthew chapter 15, verse 33. We're not going to read that passage, but it's just something I wanted to point out. Let's move on to verse 23. And it reads, "And Jehovah said to Moshe, Is Jehovah's hand waxed short? is Jehovah's hand waxed short? Thou shalt see how whether my word shall come to pass unto thee or not. So Jehovah responds to Moshe's expressed frustrations by throwing a concise but profound question back at Moshe. Is Jehovah's power limited? And then in the next sentence, Abba extends forth his loving kindness and grace towards Moshe, despite Moshe's obvious lack of understanding or faith or belief. You will see whether or not I have promised what I have promised will happen to you. You will see whether or not what I promised will happen to you. And that was the Holman Christian Study Bible rendering. Yes, Yah does not punish Moshe for his lack of faith and or lack of belief, or his words, or his frustrations. Instead, Father steps back and says to Moshe, I know you don't trust me to do what I have promised I'd do. So I'm going to earn your trust. This is the creator of the universe. I'm going to earn your trust by doing exactly that which I've promised I would do. You know, Israel had a sordid history of not believing Yah, as can be said for many of us even today. We simply do not believe Yah. Yes. Again, as I said earlier, we believe in Yah, but we don't believe Yah. Yes, we know Yah exists, and so did Moshe, and no doubt the mixed multitude, they all knew that he existed. But none of them believed that Yah could or would provide for them. Despite seeing all the great wonders Father wrought on Israel's behalf, up to this point in the nation's history, despite all the wonders that had taken place, they saw only that which they saw, which was manna for breakfast, manna for lunch, manna for dinner, but no meat, no meat. We had everything our hearts desired back in Mitzrayim. This is me imitating the murmuring, the complaining Israelites, the mixed multitude. We had everything our hearts desired back in Mitzrayim, in Egypt. But now, we just have manna. This Yehovah talked a big talk about taking us to a land flowing with milk and honey. Back in Exodus chapter 3, verses 8, in verse 17, in chapter 13, verse 5, in chapter 33, verse 3, and so forth and so forth. And certainly he did some amazing stuff. He drowned the Egyptians in the sea. He brought water out of a rock. Yeah, he did some cool stuff. And he's brought us safely to this point in this journey. But what had he done for us lately, apart from giving us manna to eat day in and day out? So, me stepping out of character, they bellyached before Yah, including Moshe. Yah had asserted in his word that he is not a liar and that he is more than capable to provide and sustain and deliver his people. Numbers chapter 23, verse 19. Jehovah is not a man that he should lie, neither the son of man that he should repent. Hath he said, and shall he not do it? Or hath he spoken, and shall he not make it good? Ezekiel chapter 24, verse 14. I, Jehovah, has spoken it. It shall come to pass, and I will do it. I will not go back, neither will I spare, neither will I repent. According to thy ways, and according to thy doings shall they judge thee, saith Jehovah Elohim. Let's go on over to verses 24 and 25. 24 reading. And Moshe went out and told the people the words of Jehovah, and gathered the 70 men of the elders of the people, and set them round about the tabernacle. Verse 25. And Jehovah came down in a cloud, and spake unto him being Moshe, and took of the Spirit, the Ruach, that was upon him, and gave it unto the 70 elders. And it came to pass that when the Spirit rested upon them, the 70, they prophesied and did not cease, Now, there is a little discrepancy in the King James Version compared to the other versions. And it says here that they prophesied once the Spirit was put on them and did not cease. But when you read into the other translations and the Hebrew, it really translates as they prophesied, but they never did it again, but not afterwards. They prophesied, but not afterward, but they did so no more, or something to that effect. So the King James Version rendering here of verse 25 is a little misleading. So when you're reading it, keep that in mind, and I would compare it to others. In particular, when you look at the Septuagint, the LXX, it reads, and when the Spirit rested upon them, they prophesied and ceased. So there seems to be a consensus that they did not continue prophesying after that event, after being in front of the tabernacle, and then I'm assuming dispersing back out into the camp. So Moshe does what he was instructed to do, and he gathered the leaders of Israel before the tabernacle, as well as he prepared the people to receive their meat. And true to Yah's declaration, his presence descended, and Yah spoke to Moshe, and then placed his Ruach, his Holy Spirit, upon the leaders. And as a result of Yah's Ruach coming to rest upon the leaders of the nation standing before the tabernacle, well, these began to prophesy. Now, I don't believe these men were foretelling, F-O-R-E-T-E-L-L-I-N-G, foretelling. That is the type of prophesying that we see done by certain evangelicals related to end time events these days. But instead, I believe these men were forthtelling. That is, they were extolling the greatness of the Almighty in words that come from their inner beings. And this is kind of related to what you would see recorded in John chapter 7, verse 38, as well as what we saw happen on that great day of Pentecost, just after Master ascended, 10 days after Master ascended to heaven to his Father in Acts chapter 2. I mean, I could be mistaken, and maybe they were forthtelling, but we have no record of the content of these elders' prophecies. All we know is that their prophesying was spontaneous and organic, but their prophesying occurred only for that moment, and then it ceased, as we saw in verse 25. Okay, let's move on to verses 26 through 29. And 26 reads, "But there remained 2 of the men in the camp. The name of the one was Eldad, and the name of the other Medad. And the Spirit, the Ruach, rested upon them, and they were of them that were written, but went not out unto the tabernacle, and they prophesied in the camp." Verse 27, "And there ran a young man, and told Moshe, and said, Eldad and Medad do prophesy in the camp." Verse 28, "And Jehoshua, the son of Nun, the servant of Moshe, one of his young men, answered and said, My master Moshe, forbid them." Forbid Eldad and Medad from prophesying, in other words. And verse 29. And Moshe said unto him, he's correcting Joshua, enviest thou for my sake? Would Yah that all of Jehovah's people were prophets, and that Jehovah would put his Ruach upon them. Oh my gosh, that is so powerful. It turns out that two of the elders, Eldad and Medad, well, they did not join their fellow brethren at the tabernacle, but instead remained within the camp. But I'm not going to make a hard and fast ruling on that. It's possible that they were in the camp, but after they dispersed, they continued to prophesy outside of the camp. So it depends on it's not clear. All we know is that you got Eldad and Medad out there prophesying out in the midst of the camp. Despite Eldad and Medad not being, or their prophesying ceasing as the others did, the other 68, let's just say. The Ruach HaKodesh also rested upon them, and they too prophesied. And interestingly enough, an unidentified gentleman, though, witnessed Eldad and witnessed Medad prophesying within the camp, and he took it upon himself to run and tell Moshe about this travesty that was taking place in the camp. Well, Joshua, Moshe's young assistant, upon receiving this news, he counseled Moshe to shut Eldad and Medad down. And in response, Moshe calls out Yehoshua's seeming jealousy, and he corrects his thinking. He corrects his perspective, suggesting that all of Yah's people should have Yah's spirit resting and operating upon them, and they too, all of Yah's people, should prophesy as Yah's Ruach gives them utterance to do so. But, isn't this petty jealousy that we saw kind of displayed by Joshua still evident in our faith community even today? Someone in the faith sees someone doing something great in the faith, and they, acting out of jealousy, they step up to criticize them in this insane hope of somehow shutting them down. Well, I personally have been challenged by people who question my authority to do what I do with this podcast. And you have to wonder at the time why what you do should matter to a naysayer in the faith. What business is it of theirs, what I'm doing? I'm not addressing them directly. I'm not having anything to do with them directly. But we know what the issue really is. There's obvious jealousy at work here. And I'll be honest with you. From time to time, I have to keep my heart in check of such jealousy as well. I have come across individuals who are doing phenomenal things in our faith community, and they're leading great ministries that make this ministry pale in comparison. And there have been times, although just a few, when I find certain things that these leaders are doing that annoys me. It annoys me to the point that I have to question who gave them the authority to do what they're doing. They need to stop. They need to shut that thing down. And thank Yah for his convicting spirit, his convicting Ruach that reveals to me that jealousy is behind my criticisms, and I need to get myself in check. You see, jealousy has no place in the work of the gospel and of the kingdom. Yet jealousy runs rampant in our faith. Just look at some of the conversations and comments that take place on your social media feeds. Instead of going out and doing that which Master Yeshua gave certain people to do, many brothers and sisters make a habit of sitting back and critically attacking those who are doing what they're supposed to be doing in the faith. Jealousy is behind that. And we'll leave it at that. Let's move on to verses 31 through 35. And this will take us to the end of the reading. And Moshe gat him into the camp, he and the elders of Israel. Verse 31. And there went forth a wind from Jehovah, and brought quails from the sea, and let them fall by the camp, as it were a day's journey on this side, and as it were a day's journey on the other side, round about the camp, and as it were 2 cubits high upon the face of the earth, or the face of the earth. Verse 32, and the people stood up all that day, and all that night, and all the next day, and they gathered the quails. He that gathered least gathered 10 homers, and they spread them all abroad for themselves round about the camp. Verse 33, and while the flesh was yet between their teeth, ere it was chewed, the wrath of Jehovah was kindled against the people, and Jehovah smote the people with a very great plague. Here we go again, folks. Messing and upsetting Father. Verse 34. And he called the name of that place Kibroth Hattaavah, because there they buried the people that lusted. And lastly, verse 35. And the people journeyed from Hazeroth. They journeyed from Kibroth Hattaavah unto Hazeroth, and abode at Hazeroth. So, true to Yah's word, the quail was brought in by a wind, and the quail descended around the people and the camp. But people, they just never they never could get it together. The people lost their minds over the quail. They gave into their greed and lack of faith that Father would keep his word and provide them the meat they desired for an entire month. Instead, they gathered large sums of quail and they stored them throughout the camp. And the people's dark hearts and their actions led to another bout of Yah's wrath to fall upon the people, this time in the form of a great plague, as we see described in verse 33. But then in verse 34, in the complete Jewish Bible rendering, it reads that the name of the place where this all occurred was Kibroth Hattaavah, otherwise known as the graves of greed, most aptly named. And it was called this for obvious reasons. Therefore, that place was named Kibroth Hattaavah, because there they buried the people who were so greedy. The issue at hand here in this spiritually rich Torah reading is that of contentment. And the question surrounding this issue of contentment is, can Yah's people learn to be content with that which Yah gives them in the midst of them trusting him to provide for all their needs? For each of us, the issue of contentment, it affects many areas of our lives. It affects our material possessions, careers, our station in life, such that being rich versus being poor, being well-to-do versus just scraping by, so on. Notoriety and fame, family and other social relationships, food, as we see here in this Torah reading, and personal health. Here in our Torah reading, the central thing that the mixed multitude longed for, that they strongly felt would bring them contentment at that period of time in their journey, was food. Let's just say something other than manna to eat. And as Father fulfilled their craving by granting them an overabundance of quail, while the people's greed could not be contained, and they sought to stock up on the quail that was delivered by Yah to the nation by hoarding it in and around the camp. And what they thought would make them content turned out to not be the thing that would bring them contentment. In fact, their search to fulfill their cravings and make them content in the form of meat, it led to a display of greed, which greed is a sin. And the lesson that this story must convey to any with eyes to see and ears to hear is that true contentment comes only when one gives over their hearts and lives to Yah and his way of life. Then and only then can one find true contentment in life. For desires and cravings cannot truly be fulfilled without Yah being the central focus of one's life. Outside of Yah, in time, one will grow tired of that thing that they thought would bring them contentment. A girlfriend, nice food, a nice car. You get a car and my gosh, that's the greatest thing you'd ever. And then, over time, you get tired of the car and you need something else. You're never going to be content. Money. If I could just get that windfall in. Oh, yes. And then you get it and you find out it's either not enough or you want more. Contentment. Eventually, one who has grown tired of the thing that they thought would make them content will seek out something more or even greater to satisfy their cravings or desires. And in the process of searching to fulfill those cravings and desires, they end up violating Yah's principles and ways, such as we see displayed here in our reading, by being greedy. When one turns their full attention to Yah and his ways, he or she will find ultimate contentment. And when one finds their contentment in Yah, well, he or she will in turn glorify and image Jehovah in all the earth. When we talk about contentment of faith or contentment in Jehovah and his way of life, we find it to be a heart thing, For when one's whole heart is given over to Jehovah, such that they place their trust in him, trusting that he will do all that he says he'll do, and he or she falls in love with Jehovah with every fiber of their being, well, they find true contentment. How, you ask? Because all of their cravings and desires will be overtaken by the things and the provisions of Yah. And those once carnal cravings and desires, well, they become nothing more than fading memories and passing thoughts in the mind of the elect. A well-known Jewish prayer captures this idea of contentment in the ways and person of Yah quite well. It is simply this: Blessed are you, Jehovah our Elohim, who has given me everything I need. Shaul echoed this same sentiment when he wrote to the Philippian Assembly of Messianics. Chapter 4, verse 19, my El will supply all your needs according to his riches in glory in Mashiach Yeshua. You see, this is the entire point behind Master's instructions to his disciples, that they seek first the kingdom of Yah and his righteousness. And then while in the midst of doing that very thing, seeking out the kingdom and his righteousness, well, Yah will fulfill all his elect's needs. Matthew chapter 6, verse 33. Prior to this direct instruction by our master to his loyal disciples, most believe that Yeshua gave this message to a throng of thousands from a mount or hill. But in reality, Master gave this message only to those disciples of his that were willing to climb to the top of the mount and hear the eternal words of the Son of the Most High. And in those instructions, he taught, take no thought for your life, what you will eat or what you will drink, nor yet for your body what you shall put on. Take no thought, saying, what shall I eat? Or what shall we drink? Or wherewithal shall we be clothed? For your heavenly Father knows that you have need of all these things. He knows what you need. those were verses 20. I didn't give you that. Matthew chapter 6, verses 25 through 32. And those are the preceding the verses that precede the seeking first the kingdom of Yah and his righteousness, and all things will be added, and which is Matthew chapter 6, verse 33. So in order to get a full complement, you need to read the entire chapter of Matthew chapter 6. So the billion-dollar question facing each of us is, can we bring ourselves in this day and age and within our respective life situations to do this very thing? That is, trust in Yah to do what he says he will do, and then be content in Yah. Had the ancients done that very thing, turning their eyes, their hearts, their minds, and souls to Yah, being fully committed to Yah's plan for them, well, Yah's daily supply of manna would have more than satisfied them as they sojourned in the wilderness. How? Because they would find contentment in Yah and in his ways. And so their focus in life would shift entirely from that of their stomachs to that of Yah and his ways. Yeah, you eat when you need to eat, but that's it. You're not longing for anything else, because all you're longing for is Yah and his word. This same principle certainly can and should apply to each of us today as we give our all to Yah and walk in Yah's ways. All of the stuff we craved in our former lives will have or should have no power over us. You know, our cravings and our desires and our lustings, they rule us. Many people are ruled by their stomachs. Many people are ruled by the love of money, and so forth and so forth. We will come to the inevitable conclusion that Abba has attended to all our needs, and thus we find ourselves in a state of true contentment and peace in Yah's eternal provision. That contentment, that peace must come with thanksgiving and praise from the contented soul. The writer of Psalm 37, verse 4, provides us clarity on this issue. Delight thyself also in Jehovah, and he shall give thee the desires of thine heart. Commit thy way unto Jehovah. Trust also in him, and he shall bring it to pass. This contentment in Yah is the thing that orders our steps in everyday life. It directs how we deal with challenges in our lives. Thus, we are able to handle the bad things that come along in our lives in such a way that we are not anxious for our own well-being, but our concern is to please and bring glory and honor to Jehovah first and foremost. And then Father takes over and makes things work the way they're supposed to work. Not the way we want them to work. I'm sorry, my hand hit the mic. I am so sorry for that. For those of you who may have your volume up, I hope it didn't deafen you, but I'm so sorry. Anyway, so let me repeat. Father takes over and he makes things work the way they're supposed to work. Not the way we want them to work, the way they're supposed to work, in accordance with his perfect will. So in closing, my friends, I know this is another one of my long ones, and I don't make apologies because this is very important. I simply want to encourage you to be content in your life through your living by every word that proceeds from the mouth of Jehovah, our Elohim. This is not an option, I'm afraid. Because as the end times descend upon us and we begin to face challenges and persecutions because of our faith, well, we will not be able to endure to the end unless we are content in the lives that Jehovah gives us as a result of our commitment to him and in his ways. I'm not talking about being content with the terrible or difficult things that life often brings us, such as caustic relationships and even addictions. For these things, these and all of the other terrible things that come in our lives and beset us in our walk with Messiah, with Mashiach, well, they must be dealt with. And in all cases, those things must be turned over to Yehovah. But that also means giving up everything to Yah. Not just those bad things, but our whole self. Trusting him to take care of every aspect and area of our lives as we walk in Mashiach, Messiah. Then and only then will we find contentment in life, true contentment, biblical contentment in life. That contentment comes as a byproduct of our faith. Thus, we're going to need contentment when our lives are turned upside down. But Yah will provide and Yah will deliver as he has so promised in his word. Until next time, my friends, may you be most blessed, fellow saints in training. We'll pick this up next installment, Abba willing. Oh, I was planning on delivering the part 2 of the Paul and Romans section that I put out last week, having to do being under the law. What does it mean? What did Paul mean being under the law, under Torah? And I was all set to do that, but then Father led me to this week's Torah reading, and I just had to share it with you. So, depending on how things go, we may move in and do our next Torah reading, which is in the 3-year Torah reading cycle, next week, leading into next Shabbat, or we may pick up where we left off in part 2 of the Paul and Hebrew Roots series on what did Paul mean when he talked about being under the law, or maybe both. Depends on how the week goes and how Father leads and guides. So I haven't forgotten Paul. We're still going head first with Paul, but as Father inserts and leads and guides, I follow his leadership and his guidance. That's what we do. So guys, take care of yourselves. Stay informed. Stay well blessed. Look at fasting and prayer, endless prayer, constant prayer, and stay connected. Stay connected to Father and his Spirit, which dwells in each of us who are called his elect. Shalom, and take care, and blessings to you, your families, and fellowship.